now is a good friend of the show, Lauren Gunter, post-media columnist. And Lauren, you're a careful watcher of Alberta politics, but Alberta politics seem to be taking on a global perspective these days, and I couldn't be happier to see it. I wanted to touch on, before we get into Danielle Smith's latest fight with Ottawa over the Impact Assessment Act, let's talk about Trump threatening tariffs on Canada in an effort to get Justin Trudeau to do some of the things he's supposed to do as a prime minister, and that is stop the flow of people and illegal drugs across the border. Danielle Smith has been, I think, working with federal counterparts in the United States, but also building these relationships with Republican governors on trade issues, not leaving the relationship up to Trudeau, thank God. What do you think the impact will be on Alberta? Will we escape some of these Trump tariffs because of Danielle Smith's, I think, clever work with United States governors?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, first of all, the thing I always go back to when dealing with Trump or when thinking about Trump is that the title of his memoir was The Art of the Deal. And so he is first and foremost a negotiator. So I don't know whether they have 25% tariffs as a economic point from some think tank that they think that's the point at which, you put enough pressure on a country that I think he just throws it out. 25% sounds good, and that'll wake them up. And to his very great credit, it did wake up the federal government. Now the federal government, which has been backing off of its crazy open door immigration policies for the last couple of months because they've become very unpopular with voters, now realize that they could be in charge of the biggest recession in Canada since the 90s if they don't do something about this loosey-goosey immigration. We have been contacted, different people at Post Media, by longtime employees inside Immigration Canada, talking about how, look, we have warned these guys for years that you can't do what you're doing. And, one of the people said, well, this Trump tariff threat was completely predictable because we had said, look, you're sending about 180 to 200,000 people a year into the United States without proper documentation because they've recognized that Canada is a very easy mark. So they've decided to use Canada as a back door into the United States. And Horan, the new border czar for Trump, he recognized this when he was with immigration control in the United States. And, it was nothing compared to what's coming across the U.S. southern border, but it's 180 to 200,000 people a year that they don't need and who have only ever come to Canada because they saw us as a quick leap pad into the United States. You could get into Canada claiming to be a visitor with a $7 visa, and then from there decide to walk across or fly across or drive across into the United States and then become a problem for them, an asylum seeker in the United States. So this now the Liberals claim to be confronting. I'm always dubious when it comes to immigration with these guys because that is one of there are two issues with the Liberals that for them are markers for how open-minded they are. One is immigration and race, which to them is inseparable. And the other one is abortion. If you want to prove your bona fides as a progressive, you have to be in favor of open immigration. And Candace Malcolm, who works for the Toronto Sun, has done some tremendous work over the last few years on just how many people the Liberals are letting in. And 2 years ago, they let in 2.3 million people into a country of which at that time was about 38 million. It's insane what they've been doing. They let in 7 or 800,000. The one that really bugs me is a 7 or 800,000 foreign students. Because, when you and I talk about foreign students, we think about, a very earnest chemistry student who's come from a third world country and he's studying now at the University of Toronto, the University of Alberta, wherever it is, and going to get a degree, maybe goes back to help out his home country or her home country, maybe doesn't, but that's the kind of student we're thinking. Most of these people come over, they go to a career college, they take a 6-month program on business administration, which, we can look at some of the effectiveness of these programs.
Sure.
Exactly. But while they were here until September, they were allowed to work 40 hours a week. Now that's been cut back to 24 hours a week. So what they were doing was they were doing these courses at these career colleges, but really what they were doing was coming here to work. And then when their student visas ran out, the Liberals extended them 3 times. So most of these people had been here for as much as 5 years. And so the Americans aren't stupid. I mean, they're looking at this and they're saying, you have this enormous cadre of people, 5 million people whose visas will run out between now and December of 2025. And where do you think they're going to go? Do you have a way of getting rid of them and making sure they leave the country? Are they just going to find a new Roxham Road and walk across the other way from Canada into the United States? Like, we've been worried in Canada since Trump was reelected last month that there's going to be this enormous exodus of people from the United States when he starts his mass expulsions from the United States. But I think what they're worried about, and quite rightly, is that there's been this massive immigration drain into the United States from Canada, because that's what people who come here, lots of people who come here, that's what they were planning from the start. And the Americans know this, and Trump's people know this, and they sent us a warning. And thankfully, it kind of woke up our federal government. The proof's in the pudding, the devil's in the details. We can see whether they walk the walk now that they're talking the talk. But still, the Trump's one threat of a 25% tariff has really rattled the Laurentian elites in central Canada over our current immigration law.
Yeah, and like you, I'll believe it when I see it, because let's never forget that he said, we've closed Roxham Road. We're really cracking down on illegal immigration and people who are making these irregular asylum claims. But then he made it easier to just fly into Pearson and do it.
Right.
So he just changed the location of all of these things happening and then patting himself on the back for saying,
and of course, the change from Roxham to Pearson was basically a sop to Quebec. Quebec was getting the bulk of the Roxham Road pedestrian crossers, and they didn't like that. So first of all, the feds started busing people out of Quebec to Ontario, and then finally they just decided, well, we'll let them fly into Pearson, and then Quebec won't be as unhappy anymore. So all of this for the last 9 years has been, I hesitate to say carefully scripted, but it certainly has been deliberate. I don't think these people carefully script anything. I think this seriously is the most incompetent government I've ever seen, federal or provincial, in my lifetime. And I lived through the Divine government in Saskatchewan.
Oh, yeah. I think they're headed towards a Kim Campbell style blowout, I think, in 2025.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, from my lips to God's ears.
Exactly.
And it is slightly insulting as a Canadian that the decay of our infrastructure because of the burden of bringing in 2+ Edmonton-sized cities worth of people every single year, the burden on our healthcare, the burden on our housing prices, the downward effect on our wages. None of those things were enough to get Trudeau to act on behalf of Canadians. He needed basically a death threat to our economy from Trump to actually even consider doing anything, which is, I think, a terrible way to govern.
It's terrible. It's obvious. It's all the reactive stuff is useless, especially when you don't know what the problem is in the first place. You can throw up solutions, but if you haven't recognized what the real problem is, your solutions may or may not hit the right mark. They're probably not going to. But further to your list of economic woes, of course, a week ago today, StatsCan came out and said that for the 6th consecutive quarter, Canadian per capita GDP had fallen. And there's 2 reasons for that. It's the 8th out of 9 quarters. So for more than 2 years now, our per capita GDP has been in decline. In the United States, where the voters are much more economically attuned than many Canadian voters, particularly Central Canadian voters, this government would be toast. You couldn't come back from it. It turned out that the Biden government was toast because of its poor handling of the economy, whether they added Kamala Harris, and every legacy outlet in the United States is falling all over her. You think our media is biased. I have not seen the kind of bias for Kamala Harris that I saw in the United States. It was revolting. But point here, our economy is faltering for 2 particular reasons. The economic policies of the Liberal government, which comes as no surprise to anyone, drive away investment, particularly in the energy sector, but in all the manufacturing and mining and everything else that we're good at. So our economy has slowed way, way down. Our growth this year might be 0.8 or 9%, but that's not enough to really call it growth. But at the same time, too, we're adding 100,000 newcomers every month, and they're looking for housing, and they need healthcare, and they want jobs, and they are eating up GDP, as everyone is. I'm not saying this is just an awful thing immigrants are doing, but when you add 100,000 people a month, sometimes 120,000 people a month, unless you're really roaring your economy along, you're going to reduce your per capita GDP. It's just there are more people looking for a slice of the pie, and the pie is not shrinking, but it's not growing either. And so the problem with the Liberals is, as you said, they're reactive to everything. They haven't a clue what to do. You know, when you get into a 12-step program, the first one is recognizing you have a problem and what that problem is. These guys can't get into a 12-step program because they refuse to recognize what the problems are, much less that they created them.